Great. Well, thank you for tuning in to the next edition here of the Navigating the Coronavirus Economy series that we've been doing pretty much weekly here. We've done this for, goodness, several months now, and we really appreciate you being here to tune in and gain some additional information and wisdom from our guests and experts that we bring on to the program. My name's Tom Dufour. I am the CEO of Big Sky Franchise Team, and we've decided to put this series together to help our clients and other small to mid-sized businesses, or really anyone out there that's looking to continue to gather information on the current situation that we're all living and going through. And so for today, we have the honor of Denny Stone with PrimePay, who's joining us, who's going to be talking about ways in which you can help take care of your team during this current pandemic situation. And really, when we think back to it, and when we reflect back on this, probably the way we should be taking care of our team regardless of any kind of situation. And so one of the reasons we've asked Denny and his organization to be a part of this is that we have found that they have a really great focus. Their organization really does a great job of focusing in on the small business. And most of our client base are those small business owners trying to figure out how to navigate just the business in general, oftentimes flowing and fighting and figuring it out on their own. And so PrimePay and Denny and his team all seem to have that same care and compassion and for working with small businesses. So Denny, with that being said, I'd like to turn things over to you and let you take the helm here.
All right, cool. Well, thank you, Tom. And thank you for all of you out there joining us on this Friday before Labor Day holiday weekend. So today, we're going to be talking about taking care of the team during COVID-19. Full disclosure, didn't necessarily set out for it to rhyme like that, but it kind of just ended up that way. Kind of catchy though, right? Anyways, but the topic continues to be an important one as we all get back to business in this virus environment. Some of you are probably already back to business. Some of you are just about to be opening up for business, while others are probably still trying to navigate all that. And along the way, it seems like all the federal, state, and even local rules and regs keep changing on all those different levels. So what we're going to do today is kind of do our best to cover all the key areas as we stand right now. So this is me. I'm going to be your guide for the next 30 minutes, call it. We'll have some time for question and answer, and I'll get into that in a second. It's important to point out that, I'm not a labor attorney. I do have a lot of experience in payroll and HR. But probably the most important thing is I have access to great HR resources. And I'll, at the very end of this, I'll share with you, at least at PrimePay, one of those resources. If after seeing all this, you kind of think to yourself, man, I need a wing person. I need a wingman to help me out through some of these things as a small business owner. So that being said, the mission today is not really to deliver legal advice, but rather to highlight some key areas that will inform, remind, maybe even inspire some positive changes, for your business. So feel free to submit any questions you have for today's webinar to the Big Sky team. And, even if they're more on the legal side, I will find a way with Tom. We will get an answer for you one way or another. All right, so here's the plan. We're going to cover making the workplace safe. Look at this from more of a federal perspective, good for everyone, best practice, largely based on CDC guidance. And then we're going to move into managing individual health. So checking employees and having employees check themselves. And from there, we'll cover dealing with a diagnosis, what to do if someone's been diagnosed on your team. And then finally, we'll spend some time on sick leave policies under the emergency paid sick leave I should say, under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. So that gets a little bit more technical. It's even hard to say, but we'll cover some of those things at a high level to kind of arm you with some thoughts, some ideas on how to proactively have some of these policies in place to protect you and your business. All right, so let's start with a good foundation, and that is making the workplace safe, or at least as safe as you can make it. So first up is personal hygiene. Masks are not everyone's favorite topic, or frankly thing to wear, but they're widely regarded as the #1 way to protect yourself and others, and essentially keeping the air around you safe. So when it comes to masks, best practices within your workplace include requiring employees and customers to wear masks. Now, in some states, and not on a federal level yet, but in some states, this decision has been made for you. But if you're required, and if it's required for employees, you should attempt to provide them, or at least have one or have a stock of them available. It just alleviates moments. Maybe the employee forgot theirs, whatever the scenario should be. It's important to have a little bit a stock on hand. Make a written policy and enforce it on masks. And if necessary, sometimes you got to explain these things to your team. You can always have a scapegoat. Could be the county, could be the state, could be the CEO. Whatever's necessary to get the job done to ensure and at least give your employees peace of mind that there's a plan in place, and you got to follow the plan to keep everything safe. So moving on from masks to hands, right? So consider having employees wash their hands as soon as they come in the door. You can schedule regular or staggered hand washing through the day. Important point here is not to have, just set a time and have all employees wash their hands. Otherwise, you're going to get everyone crowded at the bathroom or at the hand washing station on that. So, if you do deploy this, you kind of have to think it through a little bit, whether you split by last names or some other creative way, just to make sure that you don't actually create an issue of the distancing kind of being compromised. And then this is kind of obvious, but providing hand sanitizer if frequent hand washing isn't really practical or possible, or providing it anywhere that someone can't avoid a touchpad, and that could be security to get into the building, that could be time clocks, things along the way that you're providing.
Hey, Denny, really quick, a quick question about that. I'm just going to jump in for a second. For that hand sanitizer outside of a keypad or something, would they use, is it best practice that it's before or after they use a touchpad, or both?
Yeah, both. I mean, if you're really looking at risks, I think the thought would be both. I always have that moment myself where hand sanitizer is provided at the grocery store, but then they have you use the keypad, and then the person next to you uses it, and I'm like, oh, I feel sorry for them. They just, how do they know that I don't have coronavirus? So I think both is probably the solid answer on that. And we'll actually dive into that in a second here. We do have some strategies around like places and touching, but we'll probably dive a little bit farther. Yeah. All right, on that topic, surface cleaning. So you want to be thinking about all those surfaces that are out there, so a good plan, again, provide disinfectant wipes and make cleaning products available. And if you don't have those, sometimes simple things apply, like paper towels and good old fashioned soap and water. Another great best practice is assign a scheduled cleaning of those frequently services. Maybe assign it to a specific employee to take care of that. And some, cleaning products out there in the marketplace may be hard to find at times. but you may be surprised what you can use. And if you search COVID list N on the internet, Google, whatever your search engine is, I think you'll see a list from the EPA of some solid products and maybe some creative products that'll still get the job done. Yeah, and then, to Tom's point earlier, we were talking about, using hand sanitizer on those surfaces. If you have a high-touch surface, you can also mark those, bring them to people's attention, remind them that they're touching things. We're all human, and sometimes you just don't realize all the different things you touch in the workplace. Going a little further, digging a little further on these touch points, some additional good practices may seem obvious, and those of you that are already open for business may be using this, but using door stops for rooms that don't need to have the door closed, something as simple as that. If you have the budget, and you may want to consider investing in motion activated or button or pull door openers, garbage cans, and heck, even a simpler way would be just to remove the top of a garbage can so people don't touch it. There's all sorts of other motion activated devices out there. We're going to be in this probably for the long haul. So if you're already making decisions or thinking ahead on things within your workplace, places like water faucets, water fountains, and even the key fobs to get into the building or to use for your time and attendance system could be easy places that you could just reduce the risk of one more touch point. So if your business has a space open to the public, some helpful strategies would be to stagger the customer flow. If you've been to any of the larger, we'll call them big box stores, the Costco's of the world, you can see and kind of observe them deploying methods like this. Mark the floor with directional arrows, and even consider putting someone in charge of maybe explaining them. Removing or repositioning furniture, or even using the furniture to better manage the flow, so people aren't dancing around or put into scenarios or funneled together where they may feel uncomfortable. Touchless pay systems, and this is more customer facing. But many of the big providers of pay systems out there are now moving to touchless. So if you haven't considered it, you may want to. It would be a really good time to look at that. And I bet in some cases, the investment will probably be minimal. And then, here's that good old hand sanitizer again, but providing it at the door as customers walk in is always a good best practice. All right. Well, for those of you in an office environment, it's a little bit different, right? Simply allowing people to work from home, whether full or part-time, if you have the capacity to do that, technology and all the things that apply is a good plan. You can also stagger shifts, which is something, that we've deployed here at PrimePay, so that you just don't get that volume of people in the same space at the same time. If you don't have set schedules, but want to reduce how many people are in the office, you can always assign hours. You can't assume that just, I'm going to expand office hours or leave the building open longer, that everyone will just adjust to it. So it probably will take a little bit more organization than that. And then, changing around the seating arrangements. Don't assume that employees will just do this all on their own. You may have to kind of help facilitate that process. And if you're in a spot, which is possible, that you can't spread people out as well, as you want to, there's also things like barriers that you can put in there. Simple things like plywood, plexiglass, or even cardboard, just to make your team feel safe. One other more talked about and growing thing is having a meeting like we're having right now. So one of the simpler ways to pivot is to have an online meeting. And what I specifically mean by this is even if employees are in the same workspace and they're at work, you can have them attend a virtual meeting such as this using Zoom, like we're using today, but they could be in their cubicle, they could be in their workspace. The more you use it, the better everyone gets at it. And even if the budget is tight, I've listed here on the screen, a bunch of free options out there. Depending how big your business is, many of these will offer you, a free platform to meet. So consider that. And if you must have an in-person meeting, you want to hold it in a large, well-ventilated area. Think it through, set up chairs at least 6 feet apart, maybe ahead of time. Look at those pathways again, maybe rearrange the furniture so there's obvious wide pathways so people don't have to dance around to get in or out of the meeting itself. And then one important thing would be to record or simulcast the meeting for those that cannot attend. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later when it applies to the American Disabilities Act. But if you do have an employee that this would apply to, giving them reasonable access to this meeting could be as simple as sharing with them a recording after the meeting has happened. This is a little bit more technical. Some of business owners out there have more control over this than others, but a good plan is to consider a discussion with your landlord, or if you do have control, consider improving the central air filtration. I've read a lot about this. I've seen a lot about it. I know a lot of landlords are out there doing these things. But as a fundamental, increasing the percentage of outdoor air, if the outdoor air is safe, seems to be one of the specific CDC guidances on that. So, in addition to that, maybe increasing the total airflow to the occupied spaces that you have. If you have any fancy demand control ventilation where it controls the airflow based on the time of day or temperature of the building, you may want to talk through that and maybe temporarily disable it to ensure that fresh air is being circulated. And then, just thinking through where your staff is at, thinking of the airflow and having them work where the clean airflow is coming from, meaning, if they're near a lobby or a public area within your building, just kind of taking that into consideration. All right, so now we're going to make a transition. So we talked about the workplace. Now we're going to transition into managing individual team members' health. So a good first line of defense is to simply have the employees self-assess before coming into work. The list seems to be getting longer of all the things to need to check for as we go on. But right now, a few key areas that employee can self-check are, fever, or that feeling that they have a fever, a sudden or new cough, difficulty breathing, sore throat, if their muscles ache, vomiting, and a new loss of taste or smell. You can also have them take their temperature at home, which is usually, kind of the natural thing that someone would do, take temperature. We see it all the time. And if they're in a scenario where they actually don't have a thermometer, consider purchasing one for your team, or purchasing one for them. They're not that expensive considering all the risks around it. On that topic, questions come up on temperature taking. So, according to the CDC, the best practices include some key things. You want to wait at least 30 minutes after eating, drinking, or exercising. You want to wait at least 4 hours after fever reducers. Obviously, if they're taking a fever reducer because they have a fever, that's a red flag right there. But perhaps they're taking it for other reasons. They exercise, they were sore or something like that. But they definitely, you can advise them around waiting at least 4 hours. And then, if it's 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit plus, the employee really should just stay at home. So now we'll pivot to taking temperatures at the workplace. A very good, solid second line of defense, many of you may be doing. If you're not, consider it. And if you take temperatures in the workplace, here are some things you want to think about, as you do that. First of all, require masks for both parties, meaning the employee and the screener. And then further, for the screener, provide goggles or even a face shield, other personal protection equipment. Consider providing some sort of physical barrier between the screener and the employee. Try to maintain that 6 foot of distance until they must get closer, to take that temperature. Other things like gloves would be key to provide. A plan to sanitize the thermometer itself. And here's a big one. You want to keep the results confidential. So what I mean by that is, at the screening area, you don't want to have that wide open logbook with everyone's name. And if there was an issue, there's an important reason behind that. And that's because this all falls under protected health information for your employees. So you don't want to fail them by having just a big giant open logbook or piece of paper. So whoever's doing the screening has to be mindful of that. A great resource, again, if you want to jump on Google or the internet, is the CDC's General Business FAQs. They give a really good guidance, around this. Cool. All right. So 2 important points around asking, if you are going to ask your team about COVID-19 systems. Just 2 things that we want to remember is keep it specific to COVID-19, and again, keep it confidential, which I'll get to here in an upcoming slide. So here's an interesting thing that comes around. So every situation when you're dealing with people, nothing's easy, right? So what do you do about employees that are not sick, but they're anxious, about COVID-19, about others in the workplace? If it hasn't happened, there's a very good chance it will. So a good proactive plan is to alleviate the anxiety. So you can do that by, there's some simple things, but you can explain and be clear about what you're doing to keep the workplace safe. And ensure then that you're going to continue to adapt, and are also open to suggestions along the way. Allow them to wear their own personal, protection, or take extra precautions. If they have a mask and you require it, that's great. If they even want to wear a face shield, support that. You can also provide them with links to the latest guidance so they can follow along with what you're seeing themselves. And I think this is probably the most important thing. Remind them that if they don't have special circumstances, fear of COVID is not sufficient reason to turn down work. So you can't just call off because you're afraid of it. So talking that through is very important, and in some scenarios will come up. So now let's take this one more level. So you could have an employee that has a good reason to be concerned. Maybe they have a condition or disability that puts them at a high risk for getting a bad case of the coronavirus. So let me set the table on this. The Federal American Disabilities Act kicks in for any employer with 15 employees or more when it comes to COVID. There's also some states and local laws that apply, and they could even have a lower count. So you want to make sure that for where you do business, that you do a little research on this. If any of the above applies, you're going to need to provide reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities. And if someone is requesting accommodation because of a disability, you want to engage in an interactive process, and you may ask for a doctor's note. So consider some really good best practices. If you have furloughs, consider recalling that employee last. Consider just simply providing unpaid leave. If you have the ability to do so, consider allowing them to work from home. Allow them to, or provide them additional protection, or even, additional hygiene or cleaning breaks. So a common question that comes up with this is, with this specific topic, is that when an employee has a vulnerable family member in their household, right? So like this is considered an extra degree. So hopefully I'm not getting too deep here, but the Americans with Disabilities Act does not extend to that extra degree, as they call it. So you don't have to accommodate an employee in this scenario, but you should seriously consider it and take it into good consideration to kind of help this, that employee navigate, what they're dealing with. All right. So now let's talk about dealing with a diagnosis. So when can an employee return to work if they've been diagnosed with COVID-19? Now remember, that 14 days we hear about so much applies to the incubation period around COVID-19, which is why we use it for a kind of proactive self-quarantine. But for someone who had COVID-19 or anything else for that matter, they should always follow the advice of their doctor when to resume kind of life as normal. In general, if you look at the CDC though, and look what's out there right now, an employee will be okay to return to work when at least 24 hours has passed since their recovery. And that's defined as a resolution of their fever without the use of medication, and overall improvement in their other systems or symptoms. And then at least 10 days, at least as the current guidance stands, has passed since symptoms first appeared. The default here, though, is to always, we kind of have to default to their healthcare provider's direction on that. So it's not just as simple as saying, all right, timeout 14 days on that. There's a little bit more to it on that you have to pay attention to. So what about telling other employees? This is a sticky subject because everyone on your team will want to know exactly who was sick if someone was diagnosed. But we can't actually do that because that's protected medical information. We do, however, need to tell other employees that they have been exposed. All right, so do exposed employees need to be quarantined? So, these are kind of CDC terms that aren't well defined, but 15 minutes without social distancing or masks probably counts as someone at risk of exposure. So let me explain this with two scenarios. So yes, they should be quarantined if there was that close contact for a prolonged period of time. Or maybe it's no. They were sitting in a large area in a cubicle considerably far away and are currently asymptomatic. Probably not necessary to quarantine that other employee. One of the best things you can do in this scenario is reach out to your local health department for help. And they will guide you on best practices on what to do. And you can also, let your team know that's exactly what you did. And it kind of brings validity to your plan. All right, so on this same topic of you had someone diagnosed, what about closing or disinfecting the work site? So you don't necessarily need to close after a person with confirmed or suspected COVID has been there. But the areas used or visited by that sick person should be closed for 24 hours or as long as possible. And the steps should be taken to kind of clean and disinfect those areas. Some CDC guidance for disinfecting those areas, used by an employee that was diagnosed, include closing off the area used by the person who was sick, open outside doors and windows to increase that air circulation, waiting 24 hours before you clean or disinfect. If 24 hours is not feasible, wait as long as possible. Clean and disinfect all areas and items used by the person who was sick. And one interesting thing, if you need to vacuum, refer to CDC guidance. And I will say this, there are many organizations out there that you can lean on, heck, even in franchising, right, Tom? That can help with this, and they will make sure and ensure all the proper steps are taken when it comes to kind of cleaning out that workplace.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Denny. And for those tuning in, I'm an owner in a local franchise that it does mitigation and cleaning and those kinds of services. And so that business has had several recent instances of going in and using CDC recommended basically sanitization cleaners to go in and basically help clean and go behind where there was an infected case. So bringing in a professional to come in that's certified, knows how to use the equipment and machines. And one popular thing, it's called cold fogging, where they basically take the antimicrobial disinfectant and put it in this machine that basically sprays it into the air. And it doesn't damage any property, but any high contact areas, especially around desks and doorknobs and high foot traffic areas, comes in and sprays it, and it basically helps to it basically cleans the area. So anyway, it's definitely something that I've seen the our team that's running that business has been doing a great job. And depending on the nature of your business, it may or may not require it.
Yeah. Great. All right. So all right. So we're gonna pivot just a little bit here, but on that same wavelength, some of your employees will travel or take risks or be a part of activities that may expose them to COVID-19. So a popular question asked is how to handle potentially exposed employees. And assuming you don't want to or can't send them home for 14 days during that incubation period, here's what the CDC suggests as some tactics to help employees treat or to help your business handle this scenario. And they use the example of critical infrastructure employees. So think of it in terms of, all right, if you know someone who works at a hospital or some other critical infrastructure, they're exposed, right, to people all the time that could have COVID-19, but they still need to charge forward and work. So widely, the CDC adopts their tactics as reasonable when this happens. And that includes pre-screening, again, temperature check, them checking themselves, and with regular self-monitoring, the fact that they do wear a mask, they do social distance, and disinfect and clean workspaces. All right. So this is our kind of our last segment. One of the more stickier ones, right? Because this is where things get really technical. If you have questions on this section, like I mentioned earlier, even if it's a little bit more tricky, we can lean on some resources we have to get those answered. But let me dive in. So the best way to keep your workplace safe is to keep sick employees out of it. You know, we already talked about screening employees and what to do if you have a diagnosis. So let's bring it home here and finish up with sick leave policies around emergency paid sick leave. An important first step is to simply make your sick leave policy as standard and as well enforced as your attendance policy. You know, as business owners, everyone often has strict attendance procedures, but maybe a little loose on time off. Tightening up your sick leave is key to proactively dealing with all the different scenarios that COVID-19 can throw at you. So this can mean you have to change your attitude towards absence. And a good plan is to train or retrain your managers and make them responsible for sick employees. If you have attendance, incentives set up, you may consider suspending them temporarily. And then make your call-off policies reasonable. Call-off or call-out policies reasonable. Some businesses will say, well, you have to call off 24 hours ahead of time. Consider suspending that. If someone calls off 24 hours ahead, that's one thing, but they could go to bed at night, wake up, and have every symptom and have COVID within that 24-hour period. So consider being a little bit more flexible if you do have a 24-hour or something similar, more rigid call-off period. Do check your state and local law. If you're in a state or city that has a paid sick leave or family medical leave, there's a good chance that they've addressed COVID and possibly expanded their laws. If you don't already know about that. Many state and local law leaves provide job protection that have anti-retaliation provisions. So you have to make sure that doesn't factor into your future decision-making on who you would lay off, for example. And then these state and local leaves will generally be in addition to what's provided on a federal level. So you really have to kind of balance that when it comes to emergency paid sick leave. So emergency paid sick leave is covered under the Families First Coronavirus Act. From a high level, what that means to you is that it applies to all private employers with fewer than 500 employees and many public employers, regardless of their size. There is no exception for small business employers, so you have to kind of pay attention to this. It's available to all employees. So it doesn't matter how long they've been employed, they're full-time, part-time. And one good thing is though employers can take the cost of providing leave right off the top on their payroll tax bill. And the emergency paid sick leave must be offered in addition to any other PTO or sick leave offered. Employees cannot be required to use their other benefits first. And employers can't reduce the other benefits just in response to the act. All right, so duration and pay. So, the emergency paid sick leave can be used when an employer is unable to work or telework, if you have that as an option, due to the following reasons. The employee is subject to any sort of federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order. The employee has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine. They have sought out and received a medical diagnosis for symptoms of COVID-19. They have to take care of an individual who qualifies under the first two things I just mentioned. Or if they have to care for a child or take care of them in place of school if it's closed due to COVID-19. So these are all things that were covered under that Families First Act. So another question that comes up as we kind of finish things out is under the, or I should say duration and pay. I may have mentioned that before, but let me net this out. The question around pay. So full-time employees, what kind of emergency paid sick leave do they get? They get 80 hours. Part-time employees, those working less than 40 hours per week, get the number of hours worked on an average over a 2-week period. So you have to kind of calculate that. When caring for themselves, they will receive 100% of their regular pay. So if they have COVID themselves, up to $511 per day, and at a total amount of over $5,000, so it's like $5,110. When they're caring for others, employees will receive 2/3 of their regular pay, up to $200 or $2,000 total. And leave can be taken more than once, but can't exceed 80 hours. So so a great example of that is maybe grandma got sick and you took care of them and took 40 hours off to take care of her. And then you now have been diagnosed with COVID. So now you got to take care of yourself. So the other 40 hours would apply there. Hopefully, I have not lost you yet. I know that's getting a little bit deep, so we're going to bring it back out a little bit and keep it simple. What kind of documentation do you need? Simple stuff, but the employee's name, the date or dates in which the leave was requested. You want to have a statement from them of the reason they're requesting their leave, and a statement from them that the employee is unable to work, including kind of telework if you offer it for such reason. And then some sort of quarantine order or advice. Employees should include the name of their, the government entity or healthcare professional advising them to self-quarantine. And you should have that in your documentation. Wow. Okay. We're at the finish line, right? Hopefully I didn't lose some of you there. That information is not only heavy to receive, it's heavy to deliver, but we covered a lot. But if you take one thing away from today, it's that you should have a policy that allows for time off for any illness, which is limiting the spread of all viruses and allowing sick people to recover at home, allowing your team to recover at home. And overall, this will reduce the risk and just make your team feel safer. All right. I mentioned it before, here at PrimePay, we offer a very popular service. There are many cost-effective resources out there. So if you think or feel a little lost or are even afraid, oh man, I don't want to call a labor attorney or an expensive service every time, I have an HR question. One of the more popular services here at PrimePay is a service called HR Advisory. There's a lot of options out there in the marketplace. Think of it as big business HR team and an affordable small business package. It really is not that expensive given everything going on. And for as little as $39 a month, you can get all those tricky HR questions, COVID related or not. Anything that comes up, you can have a live person actually help you navigate them. And at least in the world of franchising for us, this is a very popular service that our clients love. And we usually bundle it along with payroll and HR and all the other stuff. So that's it. Tom, let me turn it back over to you. If we want to tackle some questions that possibly we can.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was fantastic, Denny. I really appreciate the information. Very, very well done. We've got some applause coming in from our attendees. And Jasmine asked a question here. Jasmine, do you want to ask a question? Go ahead and unmute yourself there.
Thank you so much for this information. I found it very helpful. I have a small company. We are 11 employees, and I have two questions. A slide before the last one with the 80 hours paid leave, was that applicable to any size of employers or just with the businesses that have more than 15 employees?
So those specific areas were actually, they apply to any employee, private employer under 500 employees. So it's actually, it kind of flips it around, right? So
Okay, under 500 employees.
as a point of clarity, so that those, when we were kind of delivering that sick leave under the Families First Act, so that is written for any employers and private employers under 500. What I mentioned earlier in the presentation was just the American Disabilities Act, and that has a employee count of 15. So hopefully that differentiates. If you heard that 15 number, you're like, wait a minute, what's the difference?
It does. And I do have one more question, if Tom, it's okay for me to address it?
Sure, please go ahead.
Thank you. I have a team member who is expecting, him and his wife are expecting their first child next month. So we worked on a plan today. He's gonna work the last 2 weeks before the baby comes from home, and then the first 2 weeks from home. Is there anything, and we are allowing him to use one of the offices in case he decides to come back to the office and stay away from everybody else. Our office is like, we have 4 or 5 people in the office at the moment, but it's pretty large, so we have the opportunity for social distancing. Is there anything else that we should consider based on the situation with the newborn and additional things that we have to do, or we may consider doing for him and his wife?
Yeah, well, first of all, the fact that you have a plan and are working on a plan, kudos to you. You're not, it doesn't apply to that 1 degree, right? So like, now if someone were to get COVID, right, and within the household, then that would change the scenario of how you would deal with that. But the fact that you have a plan in place, even though you do not necessarily have to have one, is an awesome start. I mean, you definitely want to have that, and you're reducing the risk, and anything that you can do collectively with your employee not only makes them feel better, but then everyone around them, you're just creating a good, positive workplace. So hopefully I answered that question. There's a technicality on that 1 degree that doesn't really apply, but on the same front, if someone were to actually get COVID, then suddenly it could apply if they were the caretaker. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Great questions, Jasmine. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Any other questions, comments with Denny while we have him here? Well, Denny, this was absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate this, and we will get this up to as a replay. We'll get this published so that this can be reshared with the folks who weren't able to make it today. And I greatly appreciate it, your information and sharing this with us. So thank you again, and we hope all of you enjoy your holiday weekend here. As a reminder, folks have weekend on their brain with the 3-day weekend coming up here. So enjoy the holiday. And thank you again. This wonderful information. We'll be sure to share this with you and however you'd like to share this in the future as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.